Hey everyone, welcome. This is Make It Happen, and we are excited to be with you on a Friday afternoon in virtual world. My name is Dr. Brent Siebold. I teach entrepreneurship and innovation for the Ira A. Fulton Schools of Engineering. I also have an appointment at the university level with entrepreneurship and innovation at Arizona State University. And we're doing some really cool things across the entire university with our design school, our business school, our Edson College of Nursing and Health Innovation. All sorts of great innovators in every discipline are looking at ways to make the world a better place. So here in the Make It Happen series, our goal is to give you a competitive advantage, to introduce you to methodologies, to resources, to things that can help you create change in the world, whether that's through a new product, a new service, a new intervention, new research, whatever it might be that you're into, hardware, software, or anything in between. We want to give you the methodologies to flex your entrepreneurial muscle, at least your entrepreneurial mindset. So to help me do that, I've invited one of my close colleagues and increasingly one of my dear friends, Eric Prosser, who is our brand new, well, maybe not brand new at this point, but our first ever entrepreneurship and engineering librarian at ASU, if you can believe there is such a thing. So Eric, really happy to see you. Thanks for being here today.
Glad to be here.
Cool. So if you're new to Make It Happen, the goal here is for Eric and other guests to share a tip or a trick or a resource or a methodology in a very quick format, 10, 20, 30 minutes at the most. And then we are not in a webinar. We are in a Zoom room. So at any point, I would encourage everybody to use the chat function. Any questions that arise for Eric, he might pause and answer questions on the fly, or I can help him manage questions via the Q&A environment here on Zoom. And then the last 30 minutes of the hour that we have reserved for today's Make It Happen session, we'd love to have a live discussion reflective of Eric's presentation. So those are the ground rules for Make It Happen. Bottom line is this is an informal environment, a learning environment. We hope this becomes a community of practice of change makers at Arizona State University and beyond. So without further ado, Eric, I know you've prepared some slides to share today. So feel free to share your screen, and hopefully Eric will introduce himself. And then as you all ask questions, we'd love for you to introduce yourselves as well later in the hour, and ask any questions you might have and engage in a thoughtful discussion about how we can make it happen together.
Awesome. Let me get my screen sharing here. Here we go. Hopefully you can all see that now.
Yep, looks great.
Perfect. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for coming today to Make It Happen. What I'm going to talk about today is the importance of information in the entrepreneurial environment, and kind of more specifically, how library resources can be effectively leveraged to provide competitive value. So let me make sure I got my screen going right. There we go. All right, so before I get going on kind of the main talk, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am the Engineering and Entrepreneurship Librarian at the ASU Library. And this is actually a pretty rare combination of disciplines. I'm only one of 2 librarians in the United States that has that designation, and only one of 3 in North America. Frequently in academic institutions, entrepreneurship is handled by business librarians. And as good as business librarians are, they are often unfamiliar with kind of the specific needs that engineering design entails. And then on the other hand, you get engineering librarians who are great in their discipline, but they're often focusing more on, say, the needs of STEM researchers who are in the lab, rather than engineers and business people who kind of need more practical information. So last year, the ASU Library created my position. kind of to recognize and support that special relationship between engineering and entrepreneurship that exists in the Fulton Schools of Engineering. So before I became an academic librarian, I was a practicing engineer in industry. I was a reliability engineer at a nuclear power plant. And after that, I actually practiced law as well. So I advised companies on general business and intellectual property issues, and I also litigated and took to trial business disputes. So that's kind of my background. So I kind of have this one hand in engineering, one hand in entrepreneurship, and then I turned it all into becoming an academic librarian. So what I'm going to talk to you about today are the ways in which libraries can kind of make your entrepreneurial journey easier. The way I've kind of decided to do that is I'm going to look at a few models of business development, some of which may already be familiar to you thanks to prior speakers in Make It Happen. And I'm kind of going to use these models to try and demonstrate where librarians and libraries can be of the greatest assistance and the types of resources that they have that can be assets. So just so you know, academic libraries are often better funded, better staffed, and have some more specialized resources than public libraries. So right now as students, this is actually an excellent time to use the resources that the ASU library has to support your entrepreneurial goals, because right now they are freely available to you. They kind of give you that advantage over startups that don't have a tie-in to an academic library, because they're going to have to either find their information just kind of on the general internet, which isn't the most efficient way to do things, or they're going to have to pay for a lot of this information, which financially, is a little bit of a disadvantage. So the three models I kind of want to go over today and talk about are the design thinking process, the business model canvas, and take a look at a startup financing curve. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the design thinking process. And design thinking itself isn't necessarily a new idea. I mean, it can be traced back to late 60s, early 1970s. But it's definitely gained popularity and exposure recently because it's expanded beyond, engineering, architecture, these traditional design-based fields, and is kind of getting into non-design disciplines. So even libraries and librarians are looking at things now kind of using a design thinking mindset. So, it's not easy to pin a definition on, but at its heart, it's really just it's a process that identifies problems, right? And then quickly implements and proposes and tests solutions, all with this kind of special focus on user needs. So as a tool for solving problems, it gives us this iterative process for innovation. And here's just one, visualization of design thinking. I think we've seen this before with some of our speakers in Make It Happen. But in the process, we often begin kind of in that upper left-hand corner there with empathizing, right? We identify a problem or a need, or we think we have an improvement to something, and then we want to then consider immediately how that issue kind of affects the human user, right? Immediately, we're going from the problem to the user need. And then from there, we're going to move on. We're going to kind of focus on the process, and then we're going to better define the problem and its context as we move to kind of the lower left there. Then we're going to move up to that upper right and ideate, brainstorm solutions. And that's an important part of the process, right? That's where we want our participants to be the most creative. I know a technique we've heard before is that instead of just kind of sitting around talking, write something down, right? Draw a picture. If you put something on paper or a whiteboard or whatever's handy, right? A cocktail napkin, others can visualize it, and then they can add or subtract or propose changes to that drawing as necessary. And then as soon as you kind of get that drawing, you get that idea, get out there and make a prototype. And we're not talking about a formal process of making that prototype. We want to do something quick. We want to do something cheap, right? Because the idea is, we want to get it out there as fast as we can and have people test it. Bring that prototype to the potential consumers and users, get that feedback, right? Fail quickly, fail forward, move on, and repeat the process. And now the diagram that I've got up there right now shows this process kind of as a full cycle, right? It's a nice infinity sign, but in this process, it moves from testing right back to empathizing, but kind of practically, the iteration occurs a little bit differently. And so here's another way to look at the process, where the main iteration is occurring kind of in that ideation, prototype, and testing cycle. And we move from one to another, making sure that every time we get back to that ideation phase, we're now incorporating the feedback that we've gotten from testing the prototypes that hopefully we've built fairly quickly. So I'm going to kind of use this representation of the cycle to talk about where libraries can be of the most value. So first, libraries can actually be of great assistance when you kind of need to define your issue, right? You've empathized, you've come up with the idea, and now you're going to have to make it maybe just a little bit more formal, figure out what's out there. So libraries often have a number of curated databases that you can use for background information to kind of define the issue. So you're probably familiar with a lot of the databases that academic libraries have that deal with peer-reviewed articles, whether it be in the STEM field, whether it be in a business field or any other discipline. But some of the databases that we have go beyond peer-reviewed articles because they're not necessarily going to be the most helpful thing for you when you're trying to define a problem and get a handle on it. They're great to give you the lay of the land in the technical sense, but they're not going to give you that kind of insight into consumers and the market. But we've got databases that actually have market research, that have demographic information, that have business and industry data, so that at that step where you're kind of defining the problem, you can actually come to a library, speak to a librarian, and get just a rich background on what the issue is going to be. It's a great place to loop in the librarian. Prototyping, all right? We can absolutely help you with prototyping. And just to use Hayden Library as an example, we've got a great new makerspace, and it's got 3D printers, 3D scanners. It's got vinyl cutters, laser engravers. We have some AV studios, virtual reality devices. We've even got sewing machines, so you can actually do work with fabric if you need to. And then we've got an entire electronics suite, right? So we have instrumentation, voltmeters, ammeters, multimeters. We've got Arduino and Raspberry Pi controllers. We've got soldering equipment. So the makerspace in Hayden is there, and it has a number of different materials that you can use in order to quickly build a prototype. And I know that Fulton, they have their own makerspaces too, but the nice thing about the ones at Hayden, there's kind of really two nice things. One is it's not restricted by major or by school. So if you are collaborating with somebody in another discipline at another school, at ASU, they can come in and use the makerspace where they can't necessarily use the Fulton makerspace. The other nice thing about the Hayden makerspace is right now all materials are free. So we don't charge you anything to use the machinery. We don't charge you anything to use the material either right now. So it's really kind of a nice place to make that prototype. And then once you've made the prototype, we've got ample space that's going to allow you to test it, right? And I understand right now with the coronavirus closures, it might not be the best place to, it's not the easiest to get out there and get your prototype in front of, let's say, your ideal consumer, your test consumer. But when there are people there, the libraries, whether it be an academic library or public library, you get a great cross-section of people, many of whom are often first adopters, right, on that technology curve. People in libraries like gadgets. We like to try the new things, and we like to educate others about the new things. So in terms of having the space, it's a great place to bring people in from the outside if you need to, or just kind of find, people walking along and going, hey, what do you think about this idea? Give us some feedback. So when we look at it from the standpoint of the, the design thinking process, libraries are just valuable at every stage, but really particular those three stages. So let's move on now to the business model canvas. And the business model canvas is a customer development model that kind of attempts to apply scientific method, I'd say, to business plans. It enables potential businesses to envision different aspects of their startup that they wish to map out. And if necessary, as they're doing that, they might even pivot to different strategies. So programs that use the business model canvas, they're often directed towards motivated inventors, and they encourage them to identify and interview potential customers to test their hypothesis for their proposed product or service, right? That's where the scientific process comes in, the scientific method. So the model's customer-centric, because even though innovators are often familiar enough with their own product to determine technical viability, they don't always have the expertise to establish kind of the consumer viability of a product. And the model is designed to kind of guide that second process there. So up on the screen right now, you've got an example of kind of the business model canvas plan sheet. There are kind of 9 building blocks there. And I'm going to kind of focus on 3 of these that are really well served by libraries. Obviously, libraries can probably help at every step and with every building block, but I'm going to focus on 3 because it's kind of where we really excel. First one I want to talk about is the value propositions block, which was the big one right in the middle there. And the value proposition in the business model canvas is the product hypothesis. So it's ideally what the product will need to be in order to meet your customer's needs. So for information here that we can supply, you'll need to understand the market for your product in relation to existing products that are in the market. And you'll have to understand the marketplace itself. So we've got library resources, a couple off the top of my head. We've got one called IBIS World. We've got one called Mergent Intellect. These are useful to kind of look at the market in a current industry. It gives you a nice snapshot and kind of allow you then to demonstrate the value of a proposed product beyond what might already what you might already have a handle on. The customer segment block of the canvas wants you to kind of identify who the product is targeting, right? And you may have a perfect idea as an innovator on who you want to be the potential customer, who the potential target of your idea or your product or your service is. But library resources actually exist that will help you identify the key players in a number of different businesses and industries. So it's great to know the general type of consumer or customer that you're looking at serving, but I think it's even better when you're able to find the actual customers who say control the largest share of that market. And the data that we can find can be very granular. So it doesn't have to be at, say, a nationwide level. We can actually look at it, with granularity. So we can get down to the state level. We can get even down to localities and look at demographics, look at who the big purchases are and what the market is, even at a local level. So an engineering librarian, if just a sole engineering librarian to help you with this, they might turn to an engineering database for this information. But really, this is the kind of information that is much better explored in business databases, which is kind of, I think, why it's nice to have a librarian that has that overlap between engineering and entrepreneurship. And then finally, library resources are really invaluable for identifying key resources. And we've got information on physical resources, we've got information on supply chains, but we also can assist with the intangible issues such as intellectual property. So engineering librarians were well versed in locating, in addition to intellectual property material, locating engineering and manufacturing standards that will apply to your product. You don't ever want to overlook standards in a design and innovation setting, because your product, no matter how groundbreaking, is going to be commercially worthless if it can't be sold because it doesn't comply with government regulations or it doesn't comply with standards for safety and standards for interoperability. And if you're in the private market, individual copies of standards can cost from $100 up into the thousands of dollars, and they are strictly controlled by the licensing bodies who produce them. The nice thing about academic libraries is we can help you locate them and obtain copies, and we can often do it for absolutely no cost at all to you. So take advantage of that while you're in school, that we can get this material for you for a steep discount. So the final model I want to kind of talk about is kind of look at the startup financing cycle. And there are a number of different models that describe startup financing, and they often differ in the number of stages of financing or when financial injections occur. But kind of for our purposes, I kind of wanted to use this graph here. The red line represents your revenue, theoretically and hopefully as time goes on. And you can kind of see the life cycle of where you need financing and kind of where that financing comes from. For obvious reasons, the financing at the beginning, where it's called the valley of death, that's the most key, right? That's the most vulnerable, because you've got this immense pressure from your early investors to get a product to market, to start generating sales, to start generating revenue, and as far as the investors are concerned, to start generating some profits in return for them. But Winston Churchill once had the saying, right? He once said, if you're going through hell, keep going, right? Don't stop. So once you're through that initial stage, though, you're going to close out that initial funding stage, and then you're going to start to seek some new funds from possibly venture capital firms. And this is where you're going to see this phrase due diligence pop up with these venture capital firms. So when a venture capitalist uses the phrase due diligence, that it's broad in scope, but it's really talking about they're investigating your business model, right? Your intellectual property, your financial, your marketing, your legal, environmental, personnel, everything, information management systems. But for today, I'm just going to kind of limit my discussion right now of what they're going to be looking at to the intellectual property side of things, since I was a lawyer. That's where my background is. So investors are going to want to know how you protected or researched your intellectual property. And intellectual property can come in a number of different forms, right? So you might have a trademark name for your company or for your product. If you're developing a computer program, copyright is going to apply. If you've got an invention, right, a physical object, there might be patent issues that come into play. Or you might have a process that doesn't necessarily fit within any kind of standard form of protected intellectual property by the government, and you might want to protect that as a trade secret. So one of the nice things that libraries can do is we can help you with that initial research to make sure that your product is unique enough to be protected, and identify similar technology that might already have protection, whether it be a copyright, trademark, or patent. So there are specialized research centers that are out there. One type is called the Patent and Trademark Research Center. It's actually kind of an affiliate of the Patent and Trademark Office in Washington, D.C. We have one in Phoenix. It's currently located at the Arizona State Library. That may actually change locations for the better. It's something we're working on, so stay tuned on that. It might end up a little closer to home, so to speak. But patent and trademark research centers have librarians who have been specifically trained to search for patents and specifically trained to search for trademarks. And they are fantastic at helping you locate material that might be relevant to whatever your invention is or your new technology. Patent searching on your own can be a little tricky, simply because there are a number of terms of art, a number of synonyms you might not think of, and kind of a, let's just say, an arcane classification scheme. But when you're working with a librarian who's been trained in it, it becomes much easier. So the thing is, if you do that initial due diligence on whether you might be able to obtain a patent or other protection, what your competitors have obtained protection for, then that's something that you can use to kind of position yourself to be a little more impressive for, say, venture capital firms, and address any concerns that they have about protecting your intellectual property. The thing is, though, the due diligence in this phase should flow both ways, right? So it's not just the investors who are hoping you've done your due diligence. You kind of need to do your due diligence on people or firms that are interested in investing in you. And libraries actually have databases that rate, that identify venture capital firms. So you can actually come into the library and evaluate the track record of a VC firm who's interested in investing in you. We can find out what type of expectations they have, right? What's their reputation for, say, interfering with the operations of a startup? What kind of returns they expect? how generous they are with later infusions of capital if it needs to happen. We can get you in touch with others who have worked with the same venture capital firms. So the thing is, when you're doing this due diligence, they're looking at you, but really you should also be looking at them, and we can help you with that in order to get that kind of that best fit that you want for people that you're working with and investing in your idea, investing in your dream. So the last thing I kind of want to do before I kind of answer some questions and we have a nice little conversation is kind of leave you with this quote from Neil Gaiman. And I don't normally kind of read, slides, but this one I think I'm going to take some time and read. And this was from about 2011. And Neil said, "We used to live in a world in which there wasn't enough information. Information was currency. Now we're in a world in which there's too much information. There's information absolutely everywhere. So instead of sending a librarian out into the desert to come back with the one rock that you need from the desert, it's now a matter of sending a librarian into the jungle to come back with the one tree, the one leaf in the jungle that you probably wouldn't be able to get. So Google can bring you back 100,000 answers, but a librarian can bring you back the right one." So with that, I just kind of like open up the floor. Thank you all for your patience. And I am here to assist and start the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Eric. That was great. Love this quote here at the end as well.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite ones.
Great. So looking at chat, and I would again remind everybody, Eric, if you want to go ahead and stop your screen share.
I can do that.
You might be able to see some.
There we go.
Thanks, Eric. If any of you want to chime in and share your video or at least your audio, you're certainly welcome to do so. But I also want to point out, John got us started on chat.
I see that there, yeah.
And made a comment regarding the Makerspace resource within the ASU library system. So Eric, maybe you could respond to that and give us some insight into how product developers or makers or tinkerers are using that broader array of library resources.
Yeah, and what I saw in the chat was that talking about the cities, the city libraries are also developing maker spaces, which are out there for the public as well. So yeah, I think there's definitely a trend of libraries moving to incorporate maker spaces as much as they can. One thing that you'll find though is often, the budgets for maker spaces are going to vary, depending on where the library is located and things like that. And our makerspace at Hayden, I know that we've kind of designed it to focus on what students need, what the need of the curriculum is, and what the need of students are for outside of the curriculum. So, even though we've got kind of what I would call the hard engineering sort of things, 3D printers, scanners, VR, and electronics, we kind of also have the softer side of things when we're talking about fabric working. And I think that's important too, because, not everything that we design is going to be a piece of equipment that goes into a hard case, right? And more, we might start to see wearable technology and things that we can take with us and wear on our person. And that's necessarily going to have to be something that's going to be incorporated in some type of fabric, right? Something that molds to the body or flows with the body. And having, maker spaces out there that combine those two things, that kind of gives you that nice one-stop shopping for what's available. In a lot of the public library maker spaces right now, if you're using the material, if you're using the maker space, the equipment might be free to use, but you're going to have to purchase your own material or bring it in from outside. Right now at Hayden, we're still, the 3D printer, resin and everything, that's free for students to use. We don't charge it for it. It's part of the, what we budgeted in for the use of the space. So I think it's great. I haven't, unfortunately, because of all the COVID stuff, I haven't gotten up there to play as much as I would love to. But they've been actually very busy because they've been printing face shields and face masks. And we've actually had that maker space completely operating during the entire closure, preparing PPE for folks.
Great, thanks, Eric. I'm glad you mentioned the kind of the evolution into wear tech and I went ahead and pasted a link into chat. Eric, I don't know if you've been able to see it yourself, but there's actually a new WearTech development center, a partnership between the city of Phoenix and ASU.
Oh, awesome.
Opened about a year ago. Yeah. So if you want to take a look at that, I put in a news article talking about that. So Eric's absolutely right. As technology evolves, the maker spaces that are more generalists are going to kind of start to find their footing in very specific areas of technology development, intellectual property, and all of those items. So John, before we get off of the topic of maker spaces or the evolution of the library, did you want to add any more context to your point on chat?
Not really. I just find it kind of interesting that, we have, actually going back to your quote, at one time knowledge was power and that was it. Now we've got too much knowledge. And so the libraries seem to be evolving. And not that I'm saying that the city library makerspaces are better than Hayden. Hayden, I would assume, would be far superior for the student environment than the city libraries. But the point is that you're all sort of morphing into this kind of makerspace. I was really kind of impressed that the Mesa library system actually started this. Like, this was about 5 or 6 years ago. I just kind of thought that was odd initially. But then, on the other hand, if you're doing a lot of research, classical research, and you want to do something, how do you do it? I mean, not everybody can be an Edison and build a laboratory down in, Florida and go down there and tinker for a while. So I think, in the past, you would sort of get stuck. Okay, now I got this idea, but gee, how do I actually build my prototype? And I just was kind of curious if that's sort of a library evolutionary concept that's universal, or, just Eric's thoughts on it, because obviously he's getting into a kind of a new business model himself.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of it is just libraries have always been about accessing and sharing information, right? And libraries historically have been, recent libraries have been very egalitarian, let's say, right? Original libraries, books were chained to shelves, right? They didn't want to lose anything. But as we've moved to more electronic resources, we don't want to have the library just basically be a book museum. It's a very inefficient use of our space to have shelf after shelf with books that really don't get used as much as we would like them to be used. So what we've done is we've moved a lot of the books out of the library. We have a massive storage facility over at the Polytechnic campus. And it's lovely to visit because it's kept at about 55 degrees and about 30% humidity. But we've got shelves over there that are 30 feet high that you need a man lift to access. And if somebody needs a physical book, we can get it to them within 24 hours. But by pulling all these books out of the library, we're now left with space, right? And what we've done is we've taken that space and we've turned it into collaborative areas. We've turned it into things like the maker space, where students, faculty members, researchers, community members, whoever needs it, they can come in and they can work together. They still have the ability to access the library's materials because we have physical materials, but let's be honest, most of what we have now is electronic and can be accessed with a laptop and Wi-Fi. So what we've done as libraries is kind of promoted the collaborative view of education, right? And having people work together and learn together while still kind of providing the same type of traditional services of accessing information. So a couple questions have kind of popped up in the chat. One was a question about, let me see if I saw it here, how to get in touch with me, right? So how do we approach the library to help us with market and background research for IDEA? Do we need to book an appointment with you? And I'd say, yes, absolutely. You can book an appointment with me. Let me just throw my email into the chat right now in case you need it. You can drop me an email. We also have a service called Ask a Librarian. So you can access that from the library homepage and just, pop on with any type of question that you have. You'll immediately, be speaking to somebody in the library. They might be able to get you the information you need right away. If it's something that you do need to speak to a librarian about, they will kind of escalate it up. And you can meet with me, you can meet with one of our other business librarians at Hayden, who are all fantastic. So yeah, just reach out with anything you need. But if you want, kind of use me as that that first level of contact, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, real quick, Eric, I just want to chime in on that and give a shout out to Yadi for asking that question. Thank you, Yadi, and feel free if you want to chime in verbally to follow up on this question, you may. But one specific aspect of Yadi's question is interesting, related to the help being sought for market or background research for an idea. So Eric, maybe you could kind of talk a little bit about, and by the way, I loved how you integrated design thinking and the business model canvas and intellectual property investment strategies into the context of your talk today. But maybe you could talk, per Yadi's question, about primary market research versus secondary market research, and what are the go-to resources for secondary, and why it's important probably to blend those two sources of evidence.
Right. So when we're talking about market research and we're talking about primary market research, that's kind of the thing that you're going to be going out and doing, right? So that's you talking to customers. That's you, doing your own, let's say, market survey about whether you've got a prototype or whether you've got an idea. That's kind of the boots on the ground sort of thing, is that primary marketing research. And then the secondary marketing research is kind of the material that's out there and publicly available. So for instance, secondary market research might be identifying, let's say, the age demographics of a certain area, right? Let's say you're thinking of opening up, I don't know, a yerba mate, tea location, right? That's going to specialize in that. Theoretically, you would probably want to try to locate that in an area with more younger consumers. So you'd want to kind of go out there and do that demographic research and find out, all right, where are people living, right? How are they traveling? Do they tend to drive? Do they tend to walk? Does this area get a lot of foot traffic? Things like that. And that's the secondary research that libraries are really good at, because it's material that's already been collected, it's out there and can be analyzed. And many times it's in different locations, right? It's not necessarily going to be in a library database. It might be something that the government's collected. And you might have to kind of know where in the government labyrinth you have to look. So it's important to get that information, but not just rely on the secondary, but eventually you are going to have to do that primary research yourself, whether it's market research or, as we would call it, kind of in the design thinking process, going out there and doing the testing, right? Getting the prototype in front of who you envision is going to be, your potential consumer, your potential customer. So it's important to do that.
Great. And as you can probably see, Eric, in the chat, Sarthik wants to get really personal. He wants to know deeply. I appreciate that, Sarthik. A great question. We're always curious about all of our Make It Happen guests' professional pathway. Because, Eric, you have a really cool job title. I think.
Yeah. So I just kind of fell into it. And I think a lot of academic librarians, you'll find that this is kind of not necessarily a first career. And, I started off as a reliability engineer. I got that job when I was in college as part of a summer internship. My undergraduate degree is actually in physics. I was brought in, worked at this nuclear power plant, and basically the reliability engineering that we were doing was kind of basically optimizing maintenance on plant equipment, because regardless of what is, recommended by, say, a manufacturer, not everything is, let's say, designed for use in a nuclear power plant, right? There are certain environmental challenges that can be presented to equipment. So what I tried to do was basically do a statistical analysis and try to work in cost and figure out, all right, we have to have safety at this level. And knowing that, how often do we need to maintain various equipment in order to kind of, reduce costs, reduce outages, and make sure the plant stays up, because nuclear power plants don't like to go up and down. Nuclear power plants like to just run and chug along. And while I was doing that, I was actually going to night school at University of San Diego School of Law. And I had this great idea that I was going to become a patent attorney. And I actually did an internship in the summer in a patent law firm. And they put me in what's called patent prosecution, which is the actual drafting of the patent applications. And that was not for me. I think if they'd put me on the litigation side of things, I would have ended up enjoying it much more, because there's a little bit more meeting with the client and advocacy and things like that. But, you know, I ended up becoming a trial attorney, and that got me in front of business people, right? So rather than focusing kind of on the technical things that I would have been doing as a patent attorney, now I'm focusing on practical things. Because as much as you might be right in a lawsuit, sometimes the best thing to do is pay a little bit of money and settle it, as much as you hate to do that, because from a business standpoint, that's going to be the best move for you. So I was a lawyer for about 13 years before I decided that would probably kill me by the time I hit 40, just because of the time and the stress. And I decided that was not the best fit for my personality. Right about the same time, I met a woman I went to law school with. She was actually a law librarian, and unlike everybody else I went to law school with, she actually smiled a lot. So she really enjoyed helping people, and that caused me to join a program at the University of Arizona for lawyers who are interested in becoming law librarians. So I did that program, thinking I was going to work in a law school. Ended up not working in a law school, ended up getting a job at a tiny little place called Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado, where I was the copyright librarian. But being the only person with a technical degree, I also became the science and engineering librarian there too. I was there for 5 great years, enjoyed it a lot. And then this position opened up at ASU, and it was closer to family. It was, you know, closer to home, things like that. So that's what brought me to ASU as the engineering and entrepreneurship librarian. So the thing is, I kind of pivoted through all these careers, which is kind of nice for what I do now, because I actually have stories to tell and experience to draw on.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And Sarthik had a second question about promoting library resources that I think fits in with a secondary question from John about, you know, did you have any missteps or challenges in your career that now maybe with library resources that you're promoting could have helped you personally?
You know, not necessarily missteps on my own, but I certainly have had clients as lawyers who they would just kind of rush into things, right? And I understand this, because there's a hesitancy to call an attorney, because you think, oh my God, if that attorney picks up the phone, now I'm going to owe that guy $250, and I don't want to spend $250 on this problem. I can fix it myself. And then when they do end up calling me, it ends up not being a $250 problem. It ends up being a $25,000 problem. So there are a lot of times where if you develop a relationship with an attorney and you trust them and you work well together, that, you know, making that 15-minute phone call before you do anything gives you enough information to save you, you know, 10, 100 times the amount of money down the road. You know, a lot of law when I was practicing law, the databases, you know, we didn't have the internet to the extent we do now. You had to go to a terminal in a law library, or you had to basically, you know, pay a $5,000 subscription fee every month. It was expensive. It was expensive to get that information. And I think what has happened with, you know, what's happened over time is the price of getting that information has fallen. The price of being able to put information out there has fallen. And as a result, we have, you know, I think somebody said this earlier, we have too much information sometimes. It used to be hard to find the information. Now it's hard to find the right information in kind of the tsunami of things that we are faced with every day if we try to do a search online, right? So some may think that's good, some may think that's bad. I'm fairly agnostic on information. I don't think information itself is good or bad. I think how we use it is good or bad.
Fantastic. Okay, looking through the chat, there's a couple more. I appreciate everybody getting involved. We talked about, the broader context of libraries upgrading. So similar question on that front from Harshal. Let's see. And then Adita asked about specific databases and search strategies for third-party applications. So maybe Adita, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, if you'd like to add some context to that, that might be helpful for Eric.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, good. So currently I'm in the starting stages of trying to build a application for having nearby homeless shelters showed up so that if you are accessing the application and you're in requirement of a homeless shelter service of some sort, then you could immediately look at the nearby services. And I see a lot of applications that have done similar-ish ideas, but I wanted to know which of those are around Phoenix area and what types of resources they used in order to make it happen.
Yeah, that's a good question because a lot of the resources that we have in the library, unless it is kind of unless it's a product that kind of has a long history behind it, we typically have more of the broad view of things like industries, right? So what type of trends are going on? It doesn't always get down to the granularity of, say, specific products as to what they can or can't do. That would actually be one of those few areas, well, I shouldn't say few areas. That would be one of those areas where actually just kind of a targeted Google search might actually be the best thing to do and find out, what's being discussed out there. So if there are news reports or reviews, things like that. We do have databases that do cover industry news, which could be of some assistance. But what I would suggest is, if you want, shoot me an email and we can talk about it, because I'll probably need a lot more detail about exactly, what apps you've already found, what your app is doing, and kind of sometimes it's often where it's pulling the data from is a good way to find out what other types of apps are out there. So I think there's material that will help you, but sometimes as questions get more and more specific, it actually becomes harder to find the information in what we would call that secondary information market, right? That might be the time at which you can go, okay, there's nothing out there. Now I've got to do a little bit of primary research. I've got to do a little bit of legwork and figure out what's going on with the competitors and how people are using these.
Yeah. Okay.
Eric, I have a question for you. Actually, it's a follow-up on Aditya's question, because I think you brought up a really good point. Earlier in your presentation, you sort of put together, I'm just paraphrasing, sort of like an innovation checklist. And there are a number of folks that have done things like that. And the first thing was, what are you trying to do? Which Aditya, he articulated that very nicely with no jargon. So I thought that was great. Of course, now his question is, how is it done today and what are the limits? And I think I don't have an answer, but I think that's a very important thing to do and it's hard to do. It's easier to say, well, okay, how's it done today? And just even in the limited he's narrowed his scope of his business plan pretty narrow. It's a challenge for him just to figure out in this particular locale how things are done today. And I think that's an important step that has to be, you really need to break through that before you can decide whether, or actually formulate, okay, well, how am I going to differentiate my idea or product, from everybody else out there? Because if you can't do that, you're probably not going to be successful in the end. And you really don't want to have to go through a whole bunch of effort beyond that and find out that, gee, my product has no value. So just a thought, and maybe, how you can, and even in your answer to his question, you're going to have to do a little more research to try to figure things out.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's difficult. It's not going to, that's an easy thing to say. It sounds like it's a little more difficult to do.
And that happens a lot, right? The simplest questions often have the most complex answers, right? And that's kind of honestly, it's what I enjoy about being a librarian, because, people come to me every day with questions, and they're questions I often haven't even thought about, right? Because, I'm like, oh, well, that's a great question. And okay, let's figure out how we can find this, where we might be able to find it. And I enjoy it because in helping people find the information that they need, I kind of almost become invested in their own projects, right? So I get this sense of satisfaction in helping them. But yeah, no, I thought the question was really well done. It was just, I'm not sure where that kind of information on a homeless shelter app might lie in the library material. Yeah. I see another question in the chat there from Sarthak. In the process of finding help from open source resources, are there any checks one needs to take to protect the idea itself? So from what I understand, once the idea enters the public domain before any legal approval, the process becomes void. That's not exactly correct, but you have the right idea. I think the cautiousness behind that question is perfect, because it depends on what we're talking about is going to affect the protection. So let's just say something simple like copyright. When you create something as an author, you have a copyright in it, period. You don't have to register it. You don't have to put any kind of notice on it. You get the copyright automatically. That's kind of how copyright law works now. So even if you put it out there and publish it, if you put it in a blog, if you put it in an email, if you put it on Twitter, you've still got rights in that, okay? Now, where it gets different is if we're talking about protecting technology and we might want to protect a patent, okay? Once you start discussing an idea that's patentable, or I should say an invention that's patentable, you basically have 1 year to start the patent application on that before you're going to lose your rights. And usually what they're looking at is some type of public disclosure of it or public use of it. It can include talking about the idea to potential investors, okay? So if you've got an idea that you think might ultimately have value for having a patent put on it, you're going to want to, be involved in that process early. And I hate saying that, because a lot of times what that does is it tends to chill innovation a little bit, because we start to have, inventors and innovators immediately thinking about the legal consequences of what's happening rather than kind of focusing on making a good product. The nice thing about it, though, is if you're aware of that and you're kind of keeping that invention to yourself, to your team, you're prototyping it. Once you start prototyping it, that might be the point you might want to think about, okay, who do I need to get involved in this? Is there something here that needs to be protected? Libraries are great at that initial stage because it can give you the initial lay of the land as to what's the prior art out there, what technology has been patented before, how close is it to what I have, is mine an improvement on what's there? You can answer those questions yourself, and you can answer those questions in a relatively quick amount of time. And it's not difficult, I would say, for an inventor to actually kind of start the patent application on their own. But ultimately, I think it's always a good idea to maybe involve an attorney at some point, but I don't think you have to involve an attorney at some point, especially considering you've got to consider the market, your potential profitability, and the amount it's going to cost. So I think Brent might agree with me on this, because we've had talks about, when do you get attorneys involved in the patent process? And I think Brent's like, go forward, do your thing, figure it out. And I'm a little more cautious, but practically I completely understand, both sides of the coin.
Yeah, no, it's an important balance. So I agree 100% with your response there. And Sarthak does too. Thanks, Sarthak, for the great questions. And you're getting a lot of kudos, Eric, on chat from earlier in the discussion. So again, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom. We've got about 4 minutes left. So if anybody has a final question or comment for Eric, it would be, now would be a great time.
Yeah, I see John saying there, is it safe to say that an engineering and innovation librarian is part of the team needed to develop and implement an idea? I'm not going to say I'm needed, but I would absolutely be an advantage. And I don't think you ever want to turn down an advantage in an entrepreneurial situation. Yeah.
I disagree. I think you're absolutely needed.
I'm too humble to say that I'm needed, but you'll miss me if I'm not there. Let's put it that way.
Okay, last call. I'm always looking at Gabe because Gabe is one of our few Make It Happen attendees who's willing to join us visually. So Gabe, thanks as always for being here and being a great sport.
My question really doesn't have anything to do with the process or your presentation, because you did a really good job. There's a lot of resources that I was not aware of. My son graduated from high school about 2 years ago, and he got some really good experience using SolidWorks. And once he was not able to have access to his 3D printer at school, he started going to the library, which I think it was really neat. And to know that that resource is on campus is great. I think that that'll really help some folks out that want to be able to use that.
Yeah.
But my biggest question for you now is I lived a couple of years in Argentina. Yerba mate is not common around this part. How did you find out about yerba mate, and do you like it?
I can't say it's not my cup of tea. Let's put it that way. But no, I found out about yerba mate through a student I had at Fort Lewis. We actually had a business incubator program up there that was called Hawk Tank because they were the Skyhawks. And he was the initial winner of that contest because he actually had started a yerba mate importation business in Southwest Colorado. And he was really, just the nicest guy, affable, just fantastic to work with. He was always a pleasure. And he worked in the library at Fort Lewis. He knew the value of librarians. And so I always kind of, in honor of him, like to go back and use yerba mate as a kind of a nice little example when I'm, trying to get people to research on, business issues. It's kind of a fun one.
For me, it's very bitter. And the first time I tried it without sugar, I hated it. So you got to put a lot of sugar in it.
See, he never gave it to me with sugar in it. That might have been it.
That would be it. Great source of caffeine, though.
All right, with that, we're going to say make it happen. Drink whatever Gabe and Eric are talking about. I have no idea what this beverage is, but I'm intrigued. Assuming it is a beverage, right?
It is a beverage, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, again, on behalf of everyone, you're getting, again, a lot of thanks on chat. Thank you, Eric, for being here.
Thank you.
For a great presentation, tying all these methodologies together and encouraging everyone to contact their friendly engineering and entrepreneurship librarian. We have one of only 3 in North America right here at ASU, and Eric is on call for all of us. So again, thanks, Eric. We really appreciate your time.
You bet.
And really encourage all of you to continue to move your ideas, move your research, move your innovations forward. And you've got friends here at ASU and Make It Happen to help cheer you along. So everyone have a great weekend, have a great week, and see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks all.